They say you can see it from space. They say it's over 2,000 years old and protected China's northern frontier over a distance of 6,000 kilometers. It's a strategic masterpiece, a monument in stone to a civilization that has survived for millennia. To the world, it is the symbol of China. How much of that is truth? How much is legend? How old is the wall really? How long is it? And what does this huge structure tell us about the people who built it? One thing's for sure. You can't see the Great Wall from space. This is its true story. In spring 1907, the British adventurer and archaeologist Aurel Stein struggles through one of the most arid landscapes in the world, the Taklamakan Desert. He's following a route that 2,000 years ago brought Asian luxuries to Europe, the legendary Silk Road, the transcontinental trading route of the ancient world. Stein has come from India to look for treasures said to be hidden under the sand of the desert. His expedition is extremely successful. From the buried foundations of Buddhist temples and dried-out oases in the middle of the desert, he uncovers ancient silks, unique scrolls, and priceless statues. Now he and his men are on their way to the Chinese oasis of Dunhuang.
Give me my telescope!
This garrison town has always been a life-saving refuge after the exhausting march through the Taklamakan. The very name Taklamakan means go in and you won't come out.
Give me a camel, quick!
But what Stein sees through his telescope is not the looked-for oasis. He's about to discover an archaeological sensation virtually unknown to the West. About 70 kilometers northwest of Dunhuang Oasis, Aurel Stein has come across the ruins of a gigantic fortress. Stein has discovered the Yumenguan, the Jade Gate. This hulk of clay bricks measures 24 meters by 26 meters. Its walls are 4 meters thick, and it reaches up to a height of 10 meters. Two gates, one in the west and one in the north, lead into the almost rectangular inner courtyard. This is the western end of a 2,000-year-old defensive wall. But this huge earth structure looks nothing like the familiar walled ramparts north of Beijing. Stein believes they're part of ancient China's Great Wall defenses, but he cautiously describes them as the remains of old Chinese road towers. He wrote that he had found the line of an ancient Chinese wall which traversed the desert for a great distance. In many places, it had almost been completely covered by drift sand. But the tamarisk layers which had been used to strengthen the agar cropped up so persistently that the eye caught the straight line as it stretched away for miles on the coarse sand. But what and who was the wall built to protect? Chang'an, 2nd century BC. The emperors of the Han dynasty govern the Middle Kingdom from here. Chang'an is one of the biggest cities of ancient times. 500,000 people live within its mighty walls, a metropolis designed to be the center of the world. But peace in this ordered world is deceptive and expensive. An ancient chronicle reports, when Emperor Wu Di came to the throne, he reaffirmed the peace alliance and treated the Xiongnu with generosity, allowing them to trade and sending them lavish gifts. The Xiongnu were a powerful nomadic people living in the endless steppes of today's Mongolia. The Chinese considered them to be barbarians, and they had already suffered bloody defeats at the hands of these skilled horsemen. It seemed like a good idea to buy off the barbarians with generous gifts. Wagon loads of the best silk, wine, and grain regularly left the capital for the journey north. But the dearly bought peace is not accepted by everyone. It is a burden on the finances of the state, and it also demands sacrifices from the leading families of the empire. The tribal chiefs of the Xiongnu want more than silk and other precious goods. They also demand the daughters of Chinese nobles as wives. The Chinese call this policy of tributes and marriages He-Chin, peaceful and friendly relations. But what's the alternative? The region where the Yellow River makes its great arch through northern China had been disputed by both cultures for centuries. This Ordos region lent itself to cultivation by Chinese farmers, but also to the roaming nomadic horse breeders. Year in, year out, Chinese farmers were victims of the same bloody ritual. Through the spring and summer, they would work tirelessly in their fields until the harvest was complete. And in the fall, the warriors from the north would ride in and plunder everything. The nomads needed to take what they couldn't grow, supplies to help them survive the long, cold winter of the steppes. They needed grain to eat and iron to fight with. These murderous raids had threatened the stability of the empire and the very power base of the Han dynasty. The political marriages that followed were the lesser evil, even if they involved a serious loss of face. To the Chinese, the nomads were savages. They could only be despised. What else could they think of people who foretold the future with sheep's bones, who had no writing, and who lived not in permanent cities, but in tents? But in 209 BC, one clan chieftain united the tribes that till then had warred among themselves. This nomad king called himself Shen Yu, the equivalent of emperor. The tributes from the Middle Kingdom flowed into the Shen Yu's coffers, reinforcing his control of the nomad tribes. Meanwhile, the forced marriages with China's noble families made it clear that the barbarians wanted equality with the Chinese. For several decades, this foreign policy had maintained a kind of peace on China's northern borders. For the daughters of the Middle Kingdom, their new life with the nomads was more than a culture shock. The suffering of the Chinese princesses who were married to the barbarians is immortalized in a poem written in the 2nd century BC.
My people have married me in a far corner of earth, sent me away to a strange land. The round tent is my palace. Its walls are made of felt. Dried meat is my only food. Kumis is my drink. Endlessly I dream of my country, and my heart is all bruised. Oh, to be the yellow swan that returns to its homeland.
The difference between the two worlds could hardly be greater. In the north, the wild, wandering life of the steppes. To the south, the sedentary population, subject to strict rituals and rules. The main props of the Chinese Empire were the officials, educated according to the teachings of Confucius that regulated private and public life in the tiniest detail. Confucius' pupils had recorded his teachings in the 5th century before Christ. For 2,000 years, the faultless quotation and analysis of his works was the most important element of civil service examinations. This tradition lasted until the collapse of the Chinese Empire in the 20th century. China saw itself as the protector of civilization, the cultural center of the world. And the man who embodied this claim was the emperor, the son of heaven. The high officials of the empire gathered in the imperial palace in Chang'an. The sublime emperor had summoned them to an audience. Emperor Wu Di of the Han dynasty made Confucian teachings the official philosophy of the empire. And such high moral standards were not compatible with a China that bought off barbarians with tributes and brides. Now it is time for the imperial court to determine China's future foreign policy. Under one of Emperor Wu Di's predecessors, a famous memorial described the natural hierarchy of the Chinese Empire. Court officials certainly knew it well. According to this hierarchy, the Son of Heaven is the head of the empire, and the barbarians are the feet. To command the barbarians is the power vested in the emperor on the top, and to present tribute to the Son of Heaven is a ritual to be performed by the vassals at the bottom. The sublime ruler is no longer willing to pay tribute to the barbarians and to continue peaceful and friendly relations with them. It is 133 BC. The emperor makes his decision. Nothing but military action can re-establish the natural hierarchy of the empire. The imperial army is excellently equipped and ready to attack. The emperor's generals consider their strategy for the coming offensive. In the past, the Xiongnu were superior on the battlefield, but the generals have learned from their predecessors' mistakes. This time, the Chinese will give the barbarians a taste of their own medicine. After a series of surprise attacks and skirmishes on the frontier, the empire marches out to the first decisive battle. The general of carriage and cavalry, leads a mounted force of thousands into enemy territory. The offensive is a complete success. Many thousands of Xiongnu are killed or captured, and the general's soldiers seize huge amounts of booty. More than 1 million cattle and sheep fall into Chinese hands. The Imperial Army forces the Xiongnu back to the far north of the steppes. But more campaigns will follow. This is just the start of Emperor Wu Di's politics of expansion. The long-disputed Ordos region was once more in Chinese hands. As they chased the fleeing nomads, the Empire's armies also reached far to the west. They soon occupied the Heshi Corridor, the bottleneck between the desert to the north and the Qilian mountain range. But what could they do with this empty stretch of land? For the Chinese, it had considerable strategic importance. By conquering the Heshi Corridor, they had gained access to the Silk Road, and that meant control of the trade caravans. And there was more. From the Heshi Corridor, the Imperial Army could break out and conquer new realms far to the west. And there, they could find the legendary heavenly horses that the Emperor Wu Di so desired, because with them, he could perfect his new art of war. Under the Han Dynasty, a number of breeding stations were established for the heavenly horses. One of these stations, founded more than 2,000 years ago, still exists today. After the successful campaigns against the barbarians, the emperor again summoned his advisors. He asked the critical question: how can the new order, one with force of arms, be maintained? How can the empire's new frontiers be made secure? And how can the conquered territories be protected from enemy attacks? The court falls back on a solution that already has a long tradition in the Middle Kingdom. The frontiers will be secured by the construction of a long wall. The empire's high officials speak strongly against this proposal. They warn of the risks and high costs of such an undertaking. But they cannot change the emperor's mind. Heaven created the mountains and rivers, and the Han established fortresses and walls. These all aim to divide the interior from that which is alien, says a Chinese quote from the 2nd century. Today, the farmers in the north build walls around their houses in the same way their ancestors 2,000 years ago once built the long wall at the border. First, they fill clay into a mold made of wooden boards. Then they flatten the clay with rams. It's heavy, slow work, but with enough manpower, the wall rises meter by meter. A layer of straw is laid on the compressed clay to stabilize it before the next layer of clay is piled on top. just as they used to do it, only on a smaller scale. The Han Dynasty's gigantic frontier wall begins near the place R.L. Stein would later find, Yumenguan, the Jade Gate. Here, the wall was to protect the caravans that carried treasures between China and the Arabian empires. Today, no one knows how many people were recruited for the construction of the wall. Many of them were soldiers, others were forced laborers, condemned to years of work on the wall, often for tiny misdemeanors. Still others were landless peasants, sent to the empire's largest construction site from all parts of the country. For royal officials, they were just beads on an abacus. We know, because we have later dynasties' calculations. If one soldier can build 3 paces of wall in 1 month, then 300 men can build 1.5 kilometers. 3,000 men can build 15 kilometers. So that 500 kilometers would take 100,000 men 1 month to complete. But how can thousands of people be supported in a region where there is nothing but dust and stones? Just 13 kilometers to the east of the Jade Gate, the walls of a giant granary rise in the desert. Huge amounts of grain were brought here from the fertile regions of the empire. This supply camp first saw to the needs of the construction gangs and later the garrisons of border troops stationed here in their thousands. But supply lines like this are expensive. The emperor's officials soon found a better policy. No one knows the names of the people who had to carry it out. Perhaps this man was one of them. We'll call him Zheng Bao. Like thousands of others, he became a member of a new class, that of soldier farmers, landless peasants inducted into the army. To cut costs, their families were recruited with them, and then they were left to look after themselves. By colonizing this unpromising soil, the entire region was to be absorbed into the Chinese Empire. There are still towns and villages in the region that were first colonized by soldier farmers like Zheng Bao. But few of the settlers willingly stayed in this no-man's land. Soldiers kept watch for families attempting to flee north to the barbarians. Zheng Bao and his fellow villagers were not the only victims of Emperor Wuji's expansionary policy. 2 million people were relocated into the new border regions. Those opposed to the wall's construction had warned of the high costs of such a gigantic project. We don't know if they included the price paid by the emperor's subjects. No one knows how many died building the wall. Every meter cost 1 life. That's the legend. There's no proof, because today we can only guess exactly where the wall ran. and hardly anyone can say for sure how long the Han Wall was. "300 kilometers north of Beijing, close to the borders of the autonomous province of Inner Mongolia. By the 16th century, this mountainous area near the capital will be one of the best defended border regions the world has ever seen. But remains of the Han Wall can be found here too. The Jade Gate at the far end of the Han Wall lies 2,500 kilometers to the west of here. In the 1980s, Deng Yahui walked the entire length of the Han Dynasty Wall. His discoveries relaunched the interest in the Han Wall and its scale. These are the best preserved remains of the 2,000-year-old wall. Our image of a single Chinese Great Wall belongs firmly in the realms of myth and legend.
Archaeological tests in recent years show that the Han Wall is probably the longest of all China's defensive walls. Altogether, it's about 20,000 lis long. That's more than 10,000 kilometers. Here in the north, it mostly follows the route of an even older wall, the one the first emperor built 200 years before Christ. The Han Wall runs further north than the other better-known walls. The Ming Great Wall, the one the tourists visit at Badaling, is about 300 kilometers south of here.
This is the Ming Dynasty's Great Wall, the stone dragon that has become the image of the Great Wall of China throughout the world. It was built in the 16th century for much the same reason as the Han Walls, to protect the Middle Kingdom from the northern barbarians. But this gigantic construction is made not of earth, but of baked bricks. It's more than 7 meters thick at the base, and its battlements reach up to 20 meters high. It curves majestically through more than 1,200 kilometers of the mountains north of Beijing. It follows the natural line of the mountain peaks, reaching breathtaking heights before plunging into the deepest ravines. Visitors stand speechless before this architectural masterpiece and admire the audacity of its builders. Even while they wonder about its real military effectiveness. But there's little doubt about the message. This is the frontier of our world. On the other side, the alien world begins. This wall is the expression of a culture that wanted to be entirely self-sufficient. This stone monument marks the peak of wall building in China's long history. Almost every dynasty had built its own wall. There was never a single strategic idea. Some reckon that all the walls added together would stretch for 25,000 kilometers. Many parts of many walls are still to be discovered. On the Yellow River, close to the once so hotly disputed Ordos region, there are still a few remains. Here and there, ruined towers and tumbling sections of walls still rear out of the sand. Over the centuries, the wind and the rain have taken their toll on the walls of packed earth. The relics of the old ramparts seem to merge with the natural landscape, as if they were never built by man. Hard to believe here in the myth of the wall as a symbol of the nation's strength. You're not a real man if you've not got to the Great Wall, Chairman Mao said. But for many of the country people here, the wall is just a part of their everyday lives. In their villages, they work beside the wall just as their forefathers did 2,000 years ago. Sometimes these practical farmers make their own breaches in the national icon. Further west, in the Taklamakan Desert, the Chinese always knew that the ancient wall existed. But they never paid any attention to these Han Dynasty relics. A shame, as the builders had once taken great trouble to make sure their wall would be strong and effective. As soon as a section of the wall was finished, the local commander ordered a quality test. It simulated the worst-case scenario, a barbarian attack. Archers shot a hail of arrows against the wall. Only if all the arrows bounced off did the wall get official approval. Maybe it passed its quality test once. 2,000 years later, the Han Wall has disappeared into the dust of the Taklamakan Desert. But Orelstein's discovery of the ruins catapulted this first Chinese Great Wall into the world's consciousness. Stein finally reached Dunhuang Oasis, but he soon returned to the desert with his crew of local diggers for a more thorough investigation of the Chinese limes. In some places, it still rose almost 2 meters above the desert floor. Stein followed the line of the wall for nearly 100 kilometers. During his excavations, he uncovered numerous ancient relics. Among them were wooden strips.
Shovel, please.
Upon closer inspection, he noticed that these strips were written records. Stein had found orders, instructions, and soldiers' letters from as far back as the 1st century BC. They give a precise picture of frontier defense at that time. commander's seals and secret codes were split into separate tablets. One strip says that a soldier called Wang is on duty for 355 days a year. There are private letters, like invitations to a family celebration. But the most important records show that the wall had a highly developed system of optic telegraphy, as Stein called it. There were watchtowers along the wall, where the soldiers would pass on a signal as soon as invaders were spotted. Using smoke by day and fire by night, the signal was relayed to the towers lined up inside the wall's boundaries and ultimately reached the garrison. Using a standardized code, the soldiers could even pass on the distance and the strength of the attacking force. In less than 24 hours, the message could travel several hundred kilometers. Stein later wrote, "To the northeast, 4 towers lit up by the sun behind us could be made out echeloned in the distance, silent guardians of a wall line which I thought I could still recognize here and there in faint streaks of brown shown up by my glasses. What a fine position, I thought, this height of the fort wall must have been, for a commandant to survey his line of watch stations and to look out for the signals they might send along it." The romantic view of an explorer from the beginning of the 20th century. But the private letters written by soldiers 2,000 years before tell a different story. The reality of the wall.
Danger is never too far from the Empire, but I have never felt it as close as I do now. Yesterday I saw the silhouettes of these skin-clad warriors on a mountain ridge. They were welded to their horses like monsters. It was a terrible sight. Now I'm in Ling Hu Company. That means destroy the barbarians. They gave us that name because of our supposed bravery. If we ever were brave, that was a long time ago. The emptiness of this cruel landscape is unbearable.
The Chinese hated serving on the wall. The soldiers and farmers constantly faced the danger of raids and the terrible weather conditions in summer and in winter. Tough conditions and poor food were made worse by homesickness. Their letters tell of despair. The despair of men condemned to fritter away their lives in this miserable country. And their bitterness when the emperor ignores their requests for a new posting. More and more soldiers desert to the Xiongnu, the barbarians, the enemy. The blazing heat of summer and the freezing winter storms take their toll on the wall itself. It does not, after all, seem to be made for eternity. This great construction that the officials hoped was to be of use for hundreds of generations turns out to be an economic disaster, swallowing massive sums for repairs. The barbarians break through the wall at its weakest points. Once again in northern China, the villages burn. More than 1,200 years later, Genghis Khan would say, A wall is only as strong as the men who guard it, before setting out on his own campaign to conquer China. In the capital Chang'an, the emperor and his retinue gather to receive the report from the border troops. They await the commanding general returning from the front with the latest news. It is the year 99 BC. In the 34 years since the emperor's first military strike against the Xiongnu, many battles have been fought, countless men have been slaughtered. But the enemy has not been defeated. The bloodletting continues. The Chinese have suffered an overwhelming defeat. An army of 30,000 men has been annihilated. Will the emperor send more troops against the barbarians? The sublime ruler, the son of heaven, orders another military expedition. The general is to gather a force of 5,000 infantrymen and lead them against the Xiongnu. The general has no choice. He must obey. He will not see the capital city again. The expedition ends in disaster. The 5,000 Chinese soldiers are slaughtered by the all-powerful army of the barbarians. New armies are sent against the Xiongnu. Victories follow on from defeat, but the Chinese never succeed in suppressing the people of the steppes. Nothing is known of the fate of the general. When he failed to return to the capital, Emperor Wu Di took his revenge by executing his entire family. The horrors of war did not reach Chang'an. Behind its mighty walls, life continued. At the imperial court, the changeful history of a powerful empire was recorded in minute detail. One of these ancient chronicles remains today. It is a unique source, a window into a distant foreign world. And the wall? All the chronicle says about the wall is, the Han regained control of the area south of the bend of the Yellow River and began to build fortifications, repairing the old system of defenses that had been set up by the first emperor, strengthening the frontier along the Yellow River. The Han dynasty held power in China until the year 220 AD, when it was deposed by a rebellious general. For centuries, the Han dynasty had tried everything to defeat the threat from the north. Bribery, war, and finally, the construction of maybe 10,000 kilometers of walls. But nothing could solve the problem of the barbarians. The great construction crumbled, but successive dynasties would build their own walls for the next 1,500 years. They had never been a symbol of strength. They were about political compromise. The Chinese could not dominate the peoples of the steppes with their armies, and they refused to trade with them as equals. So these colossal monuments were stopgap solutions to a problem that could never be solved. No one in China particularly valued the walls until the modern age. It was the astonishment of European explorers that turned the stone dragon into the national icon of China.